Hi Stage 3, we are going to have a look in this video at your assessment task for HIGE for Term 1. We're going to start by refreshing our memories. What is the learning intention that we have been working towards? We have been trying to understand the development of British colonies in Australia in the 1800s and the people, the groups, the places and the events that have really shaped early Australia in this time period. You have, I hope, come to know or been able to give reasons for the establishment of colonies in Australia, and you should be able to state some changes that occurred for the original inhabitants, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the Indigenous peoples, and the environment, so changes to the environment due to the presence of the British people. You should understand what everyday life was like for British settlers in the early colonies, how the Australian colonies developed over time and why they might have developed in that way or that order, and how colonial settlement has changed the environment or did change the environment. What you are going to do is create a timeline, perhaps an interactive timeline, to chart or to show the arrival and the settlement patterns, the early settlement of the British people in Australia. This is an overview of the task that you will be doing. So you are going to be making a timeline. Your timeline is going to be able to show why the British people came to Australia to set up colonies, the major events that occurred in the time of British settlement, and the people or maybe groups of people that were present in the early colonies in Australia, and any changes that occurred to the environment in that early colonial time. Now, the way that you can do your timeline is really up to you. So you might want to choose to use Time Toast, which you've been through with your teacher and hopefully you've signed up to. You might like to make it interactive by using Time Toast. You might have technology where you can use a different app or something else where you know that you can create things by drawing or by using digital software such as Notability or Explain Everything. If you're really good at using those things, you might want to use that to create your timeline, or you might simply prefer to draw your timeline on paper, and there will be big A3 paper available for you if that is what you prefer to use. The choice is yours. Think very carefully about what will work best for you, what you think will be the easiest for you, so that you can actually spend the most amount of time doing the task and actually not worrying and fussing about something you're not sure how to use or how to do. So think carefully about that. You are able to use your HIGE book, all the notes that you've taken in your HIGE book so far this term, and you have access to any of the non-fiction texts that we've been looking at from our little HIGE library that we've gotten from the library. If you would like to use any of those texts because you have an idea of something but you can't quite remember something in the details, you are welcome to use one of those books to refer to. So the criteria, what should your timeline look like or what should it include? It's really important that it has a starting date. And you need to think about, when will I start? Now, I know that the task overview told me that I need to include on my timeline some reasons why the British people came to Australia. So I've put in brackets for you prior to or before 1788. Your timeline needs to start before the British people actually stepped foot on Australia. And there also needs to be an ending date. Now, I've suggested that 1850 is probably far enough, but if you want to end yours before 1850, you are welcome to do that as well. But I've just put a maximum date on there so that you know when you absolutely should stop your timeline. Your dates need to be clear and specific. Now, most of the time, you might only know the year or the time period. For example, the 1820s or the decade of the 1820s. That's okay. Some of these things you might say, I actually know that there was a special date that had a day and a month as well as the year. That would be wonderful to include all of that information if there is an example where you know that or you can find that information quickly. For each of the dates that you set, you need to give a brief description about what happened. Why was that date important to put on your timeline? Is it because it's important because of a person? Is it important because of an event? And a brief description means just 1 or 2 sentences at the most that gives a little overview of that particular date. Your timeline needs to include information about the reasons for colonisation. So that is going to take us all the way back to Britain, and you're going to show some reasons why colonisation in Australia happened. You also need to include some information about important events in the colony. Have a think about what those are. Use your HIGE book to remind you. And information about important people. We've looked at a number of important people, but you might also be able to talk about important groups of people as well, particularly living or setting up colonies in early Australia. And then finally, images to accompany your annotations. So if you are using something like TimeToast or another app where you can insert images that you have located from the internet, that's great. You can draw them, of course, if you are doing your timeline on paper, you are hand drawing, and of course you can draw your own pictures. I strongly suggest, though, that you leave the images to last. It would be much wiser to use your time to plan out what events, what dates, what people you want to include, and actually getting all of that information into your timeline first, and then coming back when you have finished that and actually putting in your images later. Some of your events or people or some of your dates might not have a relevant image, and that's okay. That's why it says where possible. This is the marking guide, the marking rubric that the teachers will be using to mark your timeline. And I'll just talk through very quickly the different criteria here. So your timeline is going to be judged on how well it shows the events or the reasons that led up to British colonisation. And you can see from the rubric here words like political reasons, social reasons, economic reasons. Your timeline will be assessed in terms of how well or how much does it tell us about significant or important people and events from the early colonies. How many of those have you included and how well have you explained them? Your timeline will be assessed based on how well you've been able to sequence or put in order the different people and events based on the date that they happened. We know that a timeline should usually always be chronological, so the order in which they happened. So that's what we'll be having a look at as well on your piece of work. And finally, we'll be assessing how well the information comes across on your timeline. Is it clear? Is it understandable? And does it give me information in a good way that I can actually read it and understand what you are expressing about how you understand the early colonies in Australia and the different people and events and so on. So on the video, you can of course come back to this slide as many times as you would like to, If you want to check how you are progressing and how you're going while you are constructing your timeline, feel free to come back to this slide. Finally, handing in your assessment. Because we might all be doing this in a different way, here are some guidelines for handing in your work. The first thing that's going to be really important to do is to save your work. Whether that's something you're doing on TimeToast or something that you are doing on an app on your own computer or some other form of digital technology, try to save it. Now, I know that once you start something on TimeToast online, it will save it under your username. So that's always good, but always just check where it's up to before you're going to close your computer. Take a screenshot. This is a just-in-case measure. Just in case something happens to your work before you are going to hand it in, I encourage you to take a screenshot of your timeline in its entirety so that we can see the whole of the timeline. Save that somewhere on your tech, in your documents. You're going to then go to Google Classroom, and there will be a post, an assignment post that you need to turn in work for, and that will be this task. And if you have done this on TimeToast, you're going to attach the link, and your teacher will show you how to share the link from TimeToast to be able to get that code or that web link, and you're going to attach it when you go in to turn in your work on Google Classroom, and then you will mark it as done. Perhaps if you're using your own tech and computer or an app, you will need to upload the file or attach the file that you have created before you turn it in. If you use paper, very easy. You're going to make sure your name is on it and you're going to hand it to your teacher. And then you are going to click turn it in or hand in on Google Classroom to show that you have completed the assessment. If you have any questions about any of this, of course, you can ask your teacher as you are going, but you will have a couple of weeks to be able to do this assessment task. This is something for you to do by yourself, so try to maximize your time and use it very wisely. Please use your HIGE book to help you and any of the other HIGE resources that we have. But of course, you can ask your teacher at any time if you would like to clarify any of the information. Please use this video to go back and check on criteria, and please definitely go back and have a look at the marking rubric to make sure that you are on track as you are going.